I never thought that a birthday gift could turn into a calculated betrayal. I stood alone in the arrivals hall of the Rome airport, the buzz of foreign voices swirling around me like a storm I couldn't enter. My suitcase was gone. My wallet, gone. My phone, which had barely 2% battery left, flickered and died. Just as I opened the last message from my son, thought it'd be good to see if you could manage alone for once. Happy birthday, Mom. For once? After everything I'd given him? I slumped onto a bench, my body frozen with disbelief, but my heart burning. I stared down at my empty hands like I could will them to produce answers. But all I could hear was Mark's voice in my head, cold and smug as he said it on the phone just hours earlier, right before we boarded the flight. You're always fussing, Mom. Just relax and let me take care of things. I let him carry my travel documents. He'd insisted. I thought he was finally taking the reins, being the kind of son I always hoped he'd grow into. And now I was here, stranded, 70 years old, alone, in a foreign country. My heart thundered like it was trying to tear free of my chest. I felt the fear rising, clawing at my throat. But underneath it, there was something else. Anger. Not just at Mark, but at myself. For every time I said yes when I wanted to say no. For every time I handed over money, let him borrow my car, covered for his failures, convinced myself that was what mothers did. I had believed this trip was a gesture of love, a thank you for raising him alone after his father died. But it wasn't a gift. It was a test, and in his eyes, I was already failing. I wrapped my arms around myself, not for warmth, but for protection. He wanted to see if I could manage alone? Fine, I would manage, but not for him. Not to prove anything. For me. And he would regret ever questioning whether I could. The absurdity of it all hit me hardest when I remembered where I'd been just 7 days ago, barefoot in my California backyard, pruning roses under the sun, humming to the sparrows like an old fool. The phone rang, and it was Mark. His voice was warm, unusually so. Happy early birthday, Mom, he'd said. I've got something special for you. I remember I dropped the pruning shears. Italy, he announced. Rome, I got you a ticket. You've always wanted to go, right? Tears had filled my eyes instantly. Of course I had. Mark knew that. He'd listened all those years ago when I read about Roman aqueducts to him at the library, when I lit up talking about the Colosseum. He remembered. I thought he remembered. I thought he loved me. I squealed like a child. I told him I'd start packing that night. I spent days carefully folding scarves and blouses I hadn't worn in years, spritzing lavender water onto my travel pillow, like it would bring me luck. I even went out and bought 2 gifts for his children, little handmade bookmarks and Italian coloring books. I tucked them into my bag with trembling hands, already imagining their happy faces. It felt like everything I'd sacrificed. The overtime shifts at the hospital, the birthday dinners I cooked alone, the pawned wedding ring to help with his tuition, had finally come back to me. In one generous, thoughtful gesture, that night I sat on my porch sipping chamomile tea and smiling at nothing in particular. I thought, he's changed. I even whispered it aloud. He's growing up. Maybe I did something right after all. I should have seen it. The way he dodged questions when I asked about the itinerary. How he flinched when I mentioned seeing the Vatican together. I'll be busy with work, he'd said, but you'll have a blast. Work? On my birthday? Still, I brushed it off. Because mothers do that, don't we? We look for silver linings where there's only rust. We tell ourselves that silence is kindness, that lies are just misunderstandings. But now I know. That wasn't love. That was bait. And I had swallowed it whole. The first unease crept in at the airport. Mark barely spoke to me on the drive there, his eyes glued to his phone, fingers tapping nonstop. I tried to break the silence with light chatter, asking if he wanted me to bring back anything special or if he had recommendations for Roman cafes. He nodded absently, muttering, "Just enjoy yourself, Mom," before slipping back into silence. At dinner the night before the flight, my birthday dinner, I expected laughter, maybe a toast, maybe even cake. But the table was half empty. Mark had booked it at some sterile, modern place, with fluorescent lighting and no heart. His wife didn't show. The grandkids were at a school function. Just him and me and a plate of overcooked pasta. I wore the green blouse he used to say made me look like a lucky penny. He didn't even look up when I walked in. Halfway through the meal, as I tried to tell him how nervous excited I felt, he stood abruptly. "Sorry, work call," he said, already slipping his phone to his ear. He disappeared for nearly 2 hours. I sat there, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea, trying not to feel like a burden. I ended up paying the check. Later that night, I asked if he could print out the hotel details for me, just in case my phone battery died during the trip. "It's all digital now, Mom," he replied, not even glancing up from his screen. "You'll be fine." I brushed it off, told myself he was busy, told myself modern kids weren't like we were. We wrote things down, printed itineraries, double-checked everything. They trusted tech, but the pit in my stomach kept growing. The next morning, he barely slowed down when dropping me at the terminal curb. "Text when you land," he said, not even waiting for my reply before driving off. I remember standing there, holding my suitcase and passport, watching the car disappear around the corner. Something felt wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. It wasn't until I stepped off the plane in Rome that everything unraveled. At first, it felt like magic. The warm Italian air brushed against my skin like silk. The airport buzzed with the beautiful chaos of travelers and languages I couldn't decipher. I clutched my printed boarding pass, one of the few things I had insisted on, and followed the signs toward baggage claim. But when I reached the taxi line and pulled out my phone to check the hotel details, the screen flickered once, then died completely. I blinked, surprised. I could have sworn it was at 70% before the flight. I looked around for a charging station but couldn't find one that matched the adapter I had. No matter, I thought. I still had the hotel reservation email printed out. Except I didn't. I opened my bag and found my passport. But no itinerary, no backup copies, no cash. Only a single credit card, which Mark had said he'd activated with international access. Spoiler, he hadn't. And a $200 I always held in the untouchable place. I finally flagged a cab using broken Italian and pantomime. The driver tried his best to understand, squinting at the tiny text I had scribbled onto the back of my boarding pass. The name of the hotel Mark told me he'd booked. We arrived 20 minutes later at a narrow, picturesque building with ivy crawling up the walls. The sign was faded but elegant. For a moment, my heart soared. Then the receptionist frowned. "No reservation under this name," she said politely but firmly, checking again. I tried to explain. "My son booked it. For me, as a birthday gift." She smiled sadly, repeating, "No booking." I asked if perhaps it was under his name, or maybe there was a mistake. She turned the screen to show me. Nothing. No payment, no record. Nothing. My chest tightened. I asked if they could check the return flight information. Maybe he'd emailed them directly. She called the airline for me while I waited on a little velvet bench in the corner, heart pounding. When she came back, her face was pale. "There is no return flight booked for you," she said quietly. I froze. He hadn't just forgotten something. Mark had abandoned me in Rome, on purpose. On my 70th birthday, he gave me a dream trip, and then made sure I couldn't come back. I sat on a crumbling stone bench in a nearby park, the shadows of cypress trees stretching long across the ancient brick path. My fingers were stiff with cold, my stomach tight with hunger, but I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was caught in a loop, not of panic, but of remembering. Remembering every sacrifice I had ever made for Mark. I remembered pawning my mother's sapphire brooch to pay for his SAT tutor, selling my wedding ring to cover his first college semester when the loan fell through, working night shifts at the campus library and scrubbing floors at a dentist's office by day, all so he could grow up and have choices, the ones I never had. I remembered sleeping on the couch so he could have the bedroom when we moved into that tiny apartment after his father passed, skipping meals sometimes so he could eat more, telling him over and over, "Don't worry about me, just do your best." And he did. For a while, he was bright, charming. I watched him walk across that graduation stage in his tailored suit, the same one I had secretly saved up for. I cried so hard, I could barely see. Back then, I thought the hard part was over, that we'd made it through. Now I saw the truth. I had raised a man who knew how to take, who knew how to smile while he did it, and who had finally calculated that I was more valuable out of the way, preferably quietly disappearing into some foreign city where no one would ask questions. I pressed my lips together hard. Was he trying to make me desperate? Was he hoping I'd call, humiliated, asking for help, or worse, that I'd get lost in bureaucracy, declared incompetent, and tucked away into some care home like a forgotten coat? A test, he called it. No, it was a trap. But I hadn't raised myself to be a victim. I had spent my life surviving. And I wasn't done yet. I sat there for another minute, the cold settling into my bones like betrayal had settled into my heart. Then, slowly, I stood. Enough. I brushed the dirt from my coat sleeves with shaking hands, but my spine straightened as if it remembered something my heart had forgotten, that I had survived far worse than this. I dug through my bag again, hoping for anything. A contact number, a slip of paper, a miracle. My fingers closed around a tiny paper clip and a mint from the airport lounge. No miracle. But I did find something better. Determination. I spotted a young couple seated nearby on a bench. The woman had an American accent. Something about the way she said garlic bread made me almost weep with relief. I walked over, careful not to startle them. "Excuse me," I said, my voice gentler than I felt. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but would either of you have a phone I could borrow for just a moment? It's an emergency." They looked at each other. Then the woman handed hers over without hesitation. "Of course," she said, her smile kind. "Take your time." My hands trembled slightly as I dialed. The one number I knew by heart. My old friend Martha back in California. She answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Martha," I whispered. "It's me. I need your help." Her voice changed instantly. "Where are you? What happened?" "In Rome. Stranded." "I'll explain later," I said, glancing at the couple who had now politely turned away. "Please, can you go to my house? Check if anything's been tampered with. And call Mr. Daniels, my lawyer. Tell him I need him on alert. And one more thing, please water the roses." "Dolores," she started, her voice tight with worry. "I'm fine," I said, steadier now. "I just need to get home. And then, I'll take care of the rest." I handed the phone back to the young woman, who looked at me like she'd just seen something shift. Not pity, not confusion. Respect. And that, I thought, was a start. I found a small cafe nestled between two bookstores. Its awning faded, but the warmth of it like a hug I didn't know I needed. I stepped inside, grateful for the quiet clink of porcelain and the scent of strong espresso. The barista didn't speak much English, but I pointed to the cheapest coffee and settled at a corner table, shoulders hunched against the rising tide of uncertainty. They had Wi-Fi. I blessed them under my breath. It took a while, but I managed to connect. My phone was dead, but I still had my old Gmail account, and thankfully, I remembered the password. My fingers moved slowly across the borrowed tablet the barista allowed me to use, and what I found made my stomach twist. Mark had been telling the rest of the family that I was slipping. Not just in a worried son sort of way, but in calculated, deliberate emails to my niece Claire, my brother-in-law Walter, even to Martha. "She repeats stories," he wrote. "She forgot to pay her taxes last year. I'm starting to worry she can't be left alone." And there it was, subtle but insidious. He was painting a picture, one stroke at a time, of an elderly woman losing her grip. A narrative he could use to convince the courts, the banks, and anyone else who might ask. She needs help. She can't manage on her own. He was preparing to seize power of attorney. Suddenly, the test made sense. He had created a crisis, then planned to rescue me, using the mess he made as proof I needed supervision. Once he had legal control, he could access everything, my accounts, my house, the very life I had built stone by stone. I sat there stunned, the glow of the tablet screen blurring as tears gathered in my eyes, not from weakness, but from the sheer audacity of it all. He was trying to erase me before I was even gone, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. I clicked open another tab, opened Mr. Daniels' email address, and typed, "Prepare for power of attorney challenge. Immediate action required. Returning ASAP." I pressed send. Then I sat back, watching the steam curl up from my chipped espresso cup like smoke before a storm. I must have looked exactly how I felt, lost, shaken, ancient, because the woman at the next table kept glancing over, her forehead creased with concern. She looked American. Late 50s, smart wool coat, sensible shoes, the kind of face you instinctively trust. Eventually, she stood up and approached. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Are you all right?" I nodded too quickly, then shook my head, then tried to smile and failed. "I've had a strange day." She sat without waiting for permission. "I'm Linda," she said. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but if you do, I'm a good listener." Maybe it was the way she said it. Quiet, certain, like she'd seen more than her share of wreckage. I told her. Not everything. Not at first. Just that my son brought me here and disappeared. That I had no passport, no money, and no way home. She listened with both hands wrapped around her coffee, nodding slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. When I mentioned his comments about assisted living, something shifted in her face. A tightening. "That happened to my friend," she said. Her nephew started planting doubts in the family's head. Next thing she knew, he was moving into her house and had full control of her finances. I swallowed. "What did she do?" "She got mad," Linda said. "Got a lawyer. Took back every inch he stole." She reached into her bag and pulled out a wallet. "Look, I don't want to offend you, but I have enough for a return ticket. Let me help." I shook my head, eyes welling. "I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm offering. There's a difference." I'd been surrounded by people who only helped if it benefited them. This woman wanted nothing, just for me to get home. She jotted down her number, pressed a few bills into my hand, and squeezed it. "Call your lawyer the moment you land. And don't let your son write the end of your story." I stared after her long after she left. She didn't know me, but she saw me. And in that moment, with strangers laughing around me and the chill still in my bones, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't alone anymore. I called Martha again, this time over Wi-Fi, voice trembling not with fear, but purpose. "Tell Mr. Daniels it's urgent," I said. "I need him." Within the hour, my old lawyer, Mr. Harold Daniels, was on the line. His voice, gravelly and measured, hadn't changed in 15 years. "Helen," he said, "Martha told me what happened. Are you safe?" "Not yet," I answered, "but I'm ready to fight." He didn't flinch. He didn't ask if I was sure. That's why I trusted him. "I'll start with an emergency injunction to block any power of attorney Mark might be filing," he said. "But I need you stateside to sign. I'll be on the next flight." He paused. "I always thought that boy was off, but this?" He exhaled hard. "He doesn't know who he's messing with." I almost laughed. Neither did I. As we talked, he walked me through the steps. Freezing accounts, contacting the notary office, flagging my social security records in case Mark tried anything sneaky with benefits. Every word felt like armor being strapped to my skin. "You've got a clean will," he confirmed, "but I want you to re-sign everything once we revoke his access, just to be safe." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. When we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the cafe window, wrinkled, pale, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But there was something steadier now, too, something sharper. For so long, I thought silence was grace. That forgiving meant forgetting. That enduring meant strength. But I was wrong. Enduring is surviving. This was fighting back. Martha texted me not long after. "Daniels is already at the courthouse. We've got your back. Just get home." Linda had already booked the ticket under my name. I'd be flying out at dawn, and I would land not just as someone's mother or someone's afterthought, but as Helen Crawford, a woman who once stayed quiet for love, and was done staying quiet for anyone. The flight home was long, cramped, and thick with turbulence. But it wasn't the bumps in the air that kept me awake. It was the rising tide of fury. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I turned my phone back on, hoping to find a message, a regret, something resembling a son. Instead, I found the paperwork my lawyer sent me. Attached to a forwarded email from a mutual family friend, bless her, was a scanned legal document, a petition for temporary power of attorney, filed by Mark Crawford, citing repeated memory lapses, confused international travel, and emotional instability. It was dated the day after I arrived in Rome. He hadn't even waited 24 hours. The supporting documents included fake medical notes, unsigned, and a statement from a concerned family member claiming I'd wandered off during Thanksgiving last year. Thanksgiving? I didn't even go to Thanksgiving last year. He told me they were keeping it small. Of course he did. He was building the case before I even boarded the plane. I leaned back in my seat, heart pounding with a clarity I hadn't known I could still feel. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't misunderstanding. It was a full-scale coup. He wanted it all. The house, the accounts, the documents I'd kept, tucked in that little drawer beneath my bedroom window for years. The trust James and I built. The insurance I never told him about. He must have found something. Or suspected. Or maybe he was just betting that, at 70, I wouldn't fight back. But he had forgotten something important. I'd raised him. I knew how he thought, how he lied. And now, I knew how to stop him. I forwarded the petition to Mr. Daniels mid-flight. Within an hour, he responded, "Got it. Already filed a motion to block. We're ahead of him. Just land safely." I exhaled, clutching the phone like it was more than a device, like it was proof that I still had control. Mark thought he'd buried me in silence. But I wasn't buried. I was breathing fire. And the second I stepped off that plane, I wouldn't be asking for my life back. I'd be taking it. I touched down just past midnight. The customs line was long. My knees ached from sitting too long. And I hadn't slept in over 30 hours. But none of it compared to what waited for me when I turned on my phone. A video message. Shaky, low quality, sent by my neighbor's teenage daughter, Claire. Bless her observant little soul. The caption read, "Is this supposed to be happening?" I tapped play. Mark was in my foyer, laughing. Not the kind of laugh you hear at birthdays. This was the ugly kind, triumphant and smug. He was with a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, younger, red lipstick too bright for a morning visit, and a man with a clipboard. A notary. My son held up a bundle of keys and smirked. "Let's get this all signed before she comes home and forgets how to write her name." The woman giggled, twirling a pen in her fingers. "You sure she's gone? Gone?" "Oh yeah," Mark said. "She's losing it. Couldn't even remember what day it was before she left." Rome was the perfect excuse. The camera shook as Claire zoomed in on him, walking into my bedroom. "My bedroom. Check for anything with the trust name," he said. "And that gold bracelet. The one my dad gave her." My stomach twisted. They were rifling through my drawers like it was a garage sale. My drawers. My safe. My life. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't scream either. I just watched, jaw clenched, hands trembling, as my son, my only child, stood in the center of everything I built and treated it like it was his birthright. He hadn't even waited for the ink to dry on his lies. Mr. Daniels texted just then. "Restraining order request filed. Emergency motion pending. Stay put until we get the green light." Green light. I stared out the taxi window as we neared home, the familiar streets now shadowed with betrayal. Mark thought I was powerless at 30,000 feet. He didn't realize I'd been preparing to come down like a storm. By the time we pulled up to the airport bathroom, my legs barely worked. I stumbled into the stall and sat down hard on the little bench beside the sink, more out of instinct than grace. The fluorescent light buzzed above me, too harsh, too cold, a cruel reflection of how far I'd fallen. I looked into the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gray roots exposed, face pale and lined deeper than I'd realized. There was a time I would have put on lipstick before landing. Just a little something to feel presentable. But now, I didn't even bother brushing my hair. I had been abandoned, robbed, humiliated, and worst of all, no one knew yet. What if they didn't believe me? What if the story sounded too crazy, too dramatic? A mother being left in a foreign country, her house invaded, her mind questioned. Who would believe that? I pressed cold water to my cheeks and tried to breathe. Slow. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Just like the therapist told me after James died. But nothing could slow the storm in my chest now. Still, one thing kept rising above the noise. He thought I wouldn't come back. That was his mistake. Because I did come back. And I wasn't the same woman he shoved out of the narrative. I was the one rewriting it. I stood slowly, pulled my scarf tighter, and straightened my shoulders. My reflection was still worn, still raw, but behind the weary eyes, something was burning. Resolve. No more doubting myself. No more bargaining for scraps of love. Mark might have taken my comfort, my trust, even my sense of safety, but he did not take my name, and he did not take my right to fight. As I walked out of the bathroom and toward the baggage claim, I dialed Mr. Daniels again. He picked up on the first ring. "I'm here," I said. "I'm ready." His voice was firm. "Then let's finish this." Mr. Daniels met me outside the courthouse just after sunrise, holding two things, a hot coffee and a manila folder, thick enough to shake a table. "Drink this first," he said, pressing the cup into my hands. "You'll want your strength." I took a long sip. It scalded, but I didn't flinch. That burn was nothing compared to what I'd felt watching Mark tear through my life like it was a yard sale. He opened the folder on the hood of his car. "These are emergency filings to block Mark's petition for power of attorney. This one revokes any previously granted access to your finances. This one issues an injunction to freeze all asset transfers. And this," he held up a final document, "is to request a protective order against him entering your home." I stared down at the stack. Each sheet was a piece of my voice, the one Mark had tried to silence. I took the pen and began signing, slowly, clearly, one page at a time. By the fifth page, my hand trembled, not from weakness, from rage, from clarity, from remembering who I was. Before I spent 20 years trying to be whatever version of Mom Mark needed me to be. When I finished the last signature, I looked at Mr. Daniels. "Is it enough?" He gave me a small, satisfied nod. "It's more than enough. You've got your power back, Helen, in every sense of the word." We drove in silence toward my home, escorted by 2 officers from the local precinct. Mr. Daniels had pulled every string he had, and after 40 years in this town, he had plenty. As we neared my street, my heart began to pound. Not with fear, but with fury barely restrained. My house had always been warm. Soft yellow walls, lavender candles, the smell of lemon polish and old books. But now it had been violated, and I would be the one to walk back through that door. Not quietly, not with apology, but as the rightful owner of everything inside it. Today, I wouldn't knock. I would take back what was mine. The car stopped at the end of the driveway. My driveway. I hadn't stood in front of that house in over a month, and yet nothing looked the same. The porch light I always kept warm and yellow had been swapped for a cold, bright LED. My hydrangeas were dying. The mailbox overflowed with junk. And still, the windows glowed like someone lived there. Someone who wasn't me. I stayed behind Mr. Daniels as we approached. My legs were steady, but my soul was a war zone. The officers walked ahead of us, firm but calm. This wasn't a raid. Not yet. It was a warning shot. Mark's silver sedan sat cockeyed in the driveway. His arrogance leaked into every detail, not even bothering to park straight in someone else's home. As we neared the steps, I stopped for a moment. All I could see was him at 6 years old, sitting on these very stairs, unwrapping a toy dinosaur I could barely afford. "Mom, you're magic," he'd said that Christmas. And now he was inside, tearing through my life with the same hands that once held mine on the way to kindergarten. No, I would not let nostalgia soften this truth. He made his choice, and I was about to show him mine. "Ready?" Mr. Daniels asked. I nodded. No more waiting. The officers knocked once. No answer. Again, louder. The door creaked open, footsteps shuffling, a voice muttering curses. Mark stumbled in. Shirt untucked, hair wild, eyes wide with dread, as if he'd seen a specter. He had. "Mom?" His voice cracked. I stepped forward, cane steady, folder in hand. "Hello, Mark? Forgot who owns this house." He blinked, glancing at the officers behind me. "What's this?" "Talk to my lawyer," I said, nodding to Mr. Daniels. "Not here. Not in my home." His mouth worked silently, rehearsed lies dissolving. He was no longer part of this story. I held the pen now, writing the end. On the porch steps, I paused, not from fear, but grief, for what he'd done, for the trust I'd clung to too long. The porch swing swayed in my memory. James built it before his hands failed. I saw Mark at 7, laughing as I pushed him, his joy ringing through the street. I saw myself after James's death, tea cold in my lap, praying I'd raised a good man. Yet here we stood. Each step up carried years of ignored instincts, forgiven betrayals, misplaced hope. At the top, I faced my son. "I packed your lunches," I said, voice low. "Wrote notes in every one, remember?" He blinked, eyes wet. "Mom, I stayed up through your fevers, your heartbreaks, sold your father's ring for your degree. Did you know?" His lips trembled. I didn't pause. "You repaid me by stealing my name, my house, sowing lies in our roots." The words landed like stones. Final. Mark glanced at the officers, frozen, waiting. So was I. "It wasn't supposed to," he started. "I don't care," I cut in. Mr. Daniels stepped forward. "Mr. Crawford, vacate the property immediately. You're barred from Mrs. Crawford's accounts, assets, and residence." Mark flinched. I didn't. I gripped the doorknob, my doorknob, and stepped into my home. No fear, no apologies. Love without respect is just abuse in familiar skin. Mr. Daniels handed Mark an envelope. "Temporary restraining order. Stay 100 feet from Mrs. Crawford in this house. Understood?" Mark swayed, pale. I watched, unyielding. Officer Garcia let him out. I didn't cry or shout. I stood firm. As the door shut, peace settled in. My home was mine again. Mark's voice echoed from the curb. "You're ruining my life, Mom! You'll regret this." I didn't move. From the window, I watched him rage at Garcia, pointing at the house. "This isn't fair! I built this life for you!" No tears. No laughter. He hadn't built anything. I had the house, the trust, the life. He just took it. Mr. Daniels set the court papers down. He'll calm down. If not, he's locked out. Legally. Financially. I nodded. "Thank you." Mark's car screeched away, a tantrum on wheels. I sat in my chair. Worn, but mine. Mr. Daniels smiled. "You did well, Helen." "No," I said. "I did right." He left. Silence embraced me, not heavy, but whole. Mark might scream, lie, or try again, but he'd do it from outside. In my house, manipulation had no place. The days that followed were a blur of legal filings and quiet victories. Mr. Daniels moved swiftly, his office a fortress of paperwork that shielded my home, my accounts, my name. Mark's petition for power of attorney was struck down before it could gain traction. The judge, unimpressed by his forged medical notes and flimsy claims of my, quote, instability. The restraining order held firm, extended to permanent status after a neighbor, Claire's mother, testified about Mark's unauthorized entry, backed by the teenager's video. Mark didn't stop. He sent emails to family, painting himself as the victim, claiming I'd lost my mind, and turned against him. But the lies unraveled faster than he could spin them. Martha rallied my niece Claire and brother-in-law Walter, showing them the evidence. Bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals, the fake hotel booking, the non-existent return flight. They cut contact with him, their silence louder than any argument. His world shrank. His employer fired him when the fraud allegations surfaced, his reputation as a reliable consultant crumbling. Social media posts from former friends stopped tagging him. His wife left, taking the kids, unwilling to tether herself to his sinking ship. I heard through Claire that he'd moved into a cheap motel, his silver sedan now a fixture in the parking lot. I didn't rejoice. I didn't mourn. I felt the weight of it all. Decades of love poured into a son who saw me as a means to an end. But I also felt free. The house was mine again. I replaced the cold LED porch light with a warm yellow one. I revived the hydrangeas, their blooms defiant against neglect. The mailbox was cleared, the lavender candles relit. I sat on the porch swing, tea warm in my hands, and watched the sparrows return. Mr. Daniels called one last time. "It's over, Helen. Full control restored. He can't touch you now." "Thank you," I said, voice steady. I hung up and looked at the swing. James's swing. I saw Mark at 7, giggling as I pushed him. I saw myself, alone after James's death, praying I'd raised a good man. I hadn't, but I'd raised myself, and that was enough. Mark might try again someday. New lies, new schemes, but he'd find a locked door. A woman who no longer bent. I stood, brushed my hands, and walked inside. My home. My story. The pen was mine.